So we want to get your CBD into big box stores. We've got a great panel here. I want to introduce them. So we have Sandra. Sandra, how do you say your last name, please?
Thibodeau.
Sandra Thibodeau. She comes from, let me read everything about her. She's the founder and CEO of Cannabis Business Opportunities, correct?
Yeah.
And Sandra's superpower is that she creates opportunities and produces solutions for her clients. And it's a creative methodology that her mind embarks on, and she does a lot of good for people. Our second panelist is Stephen Barrymore. Stephen, raise your hand. He's the Director of New Business Development for Corners Packaging. And Stephen's superpower is that they practice sustainable practices. They have a carbon neutral facility, 100% renewable energy, and zero waste. So that's awesome, Stephen. And then we have Kelly Bruce, who is the President of Sales for a company called A Boring Life. And I love that because what Kelly does is she creates space. She creates boring moments to spark creativity and reflection. And then our last panelist, do we say last but not least, right? That's what we're supposed to say. Okay, is Peter Marine. He's the co-founder and CEO of Mox Mind and Body. And his superpower is, I guess we'll call it a superpower, is really having consumers be aware of what products really have. 90% is water. Can you tell them what that is?
Yeah, I mean, if I asked you what percentage of your skincare product was water, what would you say? Probably 5%, 3%. It's actually like 90 of the typical product out there, which is wrong. So we're fixing that.
Yeah. So that's his superpower. So anyway, so welcome our guests here. And we're going to start with reviewing for the audience the essentials of getting our products into market. So that's going to cover compliancy issues and rules, and we'll get that as the foundation. We're going to go into the next part where we're going to talk about the retail presence, the where, positioning, the how. Then we're going to go into packaging, and then we're going to talk about how to stay flexible in a changing environment and market. After that, we'll give about 10 minutes for questions, and then you can talk with the panelists afterwards, okay? All right, so let's start. I would like to start with Kelly, if that's okay. We'll start on that end.
It's not.
It's not okay?
No, it's fine.
Okay, it's okay. We can go to Sandra.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
flexible.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
So let's talk about getting what's the first step that they need to do or to think about from a compliancy standard and the rules and regulations of getting their product into the market.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's a difficult question to answer from a CBD perspective because the FDA hasn't made any type of a ruling in regard to regulations, especially getting into the big box realm. As far as big box is concerned right now, they're kind of laying low before they want to start accepting or even looking at the product. But before you can even get to that step, you've got to make sure that you've got the right packaging and all of the things we're going to be talking about on the panel today. You've got to make sure that everything you have is compliant with the traditional FDA regulations for food. So you want to make sure that you've got the right packaging, you've got the nutrition facts, you've got everything that is necessary for a typical item that's going to go on the shelf. Now, when you get into CBD, I think you've probably seen it throughout the show today. They're trying to make sure that you've got CAOs, so you're testing all of the product and that you know from start to finish where your product is coming from. So that's crucial. And once you have all of that together and you're ready to go from that perspective, then you can take it to a Kroger or a Safeway or the CVS. Right now, they're only looking at topicals. But if you're looking at doing food products, you really have to be ahead of the game and think about what would you want to give to your family and make sure that everything that you have and everything that you want your family to ingest is something that you have already looked at and is available.
Excellent. Does any of the panelists want to add to that?
I do. From a procurement and supply chain standpoint, I know that the retailers, they look more, there's certain qualifications you need to meet just to even start doing business with them in terms of, making sure you have your ducks in a row legally, you're legally formed, making sure you have your DUNS number, your tax identification number. If you have, if your company's financed by a third party, there's going to have to be extra documentation that comes into place that they're going to want to see. They want to also know about detail your product information And they want to make sure that you guys have a handle on your supply chain. That means anyone that's providing you your raw materials or refined ingredients, that you have a QA/QC, a quality assurance program over them, that you're monitoring that, because they're in it for the long run when they put your product on their shelves. So you have to make sure that it's consistent. And the way to stay consistent is by managing your supplier network. So if you don't have, your supplier code of conduct instituted, or your suppliers, that's going to cause red flags and maybe be an issue for you to even get into the retail stores.
Oh, thank you. Right. And the compliancy is a changing issue. Is that correct at this point? And are we seeing things happen as far as the supply chain compliancy goes?
So in terms of supply chain, I mean, you could adapt the best practices from any other industry. The laws that are going to change, obviously when in December or whenever the FDA comes out with their regulatory rules, that's going to really drive what type of suppliers you have to source to even be able to get into big box retail. So depending on what they come out with, that's gonna set the tone for what suppliers you can go to.
Okay,
Or
great.
should go to, yes.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, and we just, as a company that does have a lot of clients that do super large volumes, we need to make sure that we are compliant in a lot of different facets of what we do. And it's not hard to get to the root of, is one of your vendors or suppliers compliant? Most of the time they'll champion their certifications. So really just be very diligent about asking your suppliers, what are your certifications? What are you compliant in? What can I advertise my product as being compliant with? And usually any good supplier is going to be able to tell you.
I would just add that looking at state regulations is important. We're a topical brand, so we're not playing in the ingestible space. It's a little easier right now getting into retailers, but they ask a lot of questions around supply chain, how you manufacture. And one thing in particular, just as an example, with CVS, we were producing a piece of collateral for them. The number of times we went through legal review was 10 times on claims. And that's a form of compliance, which is another way to think about that as responsibility. If you make irresponsible claims, you won't stay in distribution. So that's something that they're very, very worried about, hyperbole or any unsubstantiated scientific claims.
Great. And what I'd like to do, I know we talked a little differently ahead of time. Let's go ahead and take one or two questions on that topic, and then we'll go into the next one. Does anybody have a question? Okay, let me come down and get you some mic access. We have a speakeasy at our booth. I don't dress like this all the time. Sorry.
Hi, thank you. My question relates directly to what you were just saying about CVS. They have this, they put your materials through legal review 10 times for compliance and all that kind of stuff. And yet at the same time, they had Curaleaf on the shelves. What's going on? Are they figuring it out too?
Yeah, I think what happened, for those of you who don't know, Curaleaf received an FDA warning letter. And what Curaleaf was doing was using consumer testimonials to infer claims, and the FDA didn't like that because the FDA doesn't make a distinction between a marketing claim, a testimonial. It's the body of work. When Curaleaf got the FDA letter, they were dropped from distribution, and as a result, CVS and other national retailers, they're very, very worried about compliance because they don't want to put on the shelves things that they know are out of compliance for many reasons. There's a lot of scrutiny and pressure, I would say, on the buyers. Much more than you understand.
Can I just ask something for the audience? Is there a standardization that or somebody that they can go to in their states that can help them with those compliance issues? So they don't have to figure all of this out themselves? Does anybody know?
So my company, this is what we do. If you come to us, we will sit with you and work with what retailers need and assess what you have. I know there's also consulting groups out there that are very knowledgeable in what they do within their states, and other professionals. So you just have to ask the right questions, interview the people that you are going to bring onto your team to help you through this process.
Good, thank you. Do we have another question? All right, good. Well, and afterwards, if you want to get some more information from Sandra or any of the panelists, they'll be available in 15 minutes or so as well. So our next topic we want to talk about is retail presence. Where you should be. Should you be in the little stores, the CVS, the pharmacies? Do you want to be in the big box stores, even bigger? We're talking about Walmart, et cetera. And this panel has a wealth of experience on it, but they're not just going to talk about where to put it, it's how to position it, right? And let's go ahead and start on this side.
Sure. I mean, not all big box distribution is good distribution, I would just say. I would be very purposeful about what's the positioning of your brand, where do those people shop. Most of the CBD category was established in alternative channels like dispensary. We did not want to build a brand for dispensary. We wanted to build a brand for national retail. Totally different audience, different price point, different message. So it's not necessarily always the right thing to default to the large national retailer. The one thing about national retail is you can get in typically if you have a great value proposition, but the question is, can you stay in? And you won't stay in if you don't have a clearly positioned brand with the right price that's delighting people. And I think that's the biggest risk point right now. Delighting people. If you don't know that your product delights people, do not take it to a national retailer yet. You don't want to fail at that level. Yeah, if you don't know that your products delight people and that you have repeat, don't go to a national retailer because you won't get repeat. And once you get kicked out, you'll never get back in. Yeah.
Great.
I would just say make sure that where you position your brand and your products runs parallel with what your marketing strategy is. There's a vast array of CBD products that do different things, that are advertised as doing different things. Some are much more pharmaceutical, some are much more cosmetic. Think about what your brand presence is and what does your product really do when you're thinking about what stores you need to be targeting and what type of retail space you really want to thrive in. Your marketing and brand strategy should really reflect what your product does, and then what your product does should dictate where you eventually want yourself to end up. Obviously, if it has a more pharmaceutical purpose, a pharmacy is better. If it's more cosmetic based, then think about places where there are going to be more shoppers looking for cosmetics. And then make sure that your marketing and your artwork on your packaging basically reflects properly what your product does and what you want consumers to think it does.
Thank you.
From our standpoint, we want to make sure that you understand that going to retail means that you should be able to scale very quickly and at a fast pace. So that means your supply chain should be able to scale with the demands of the retailer. So from my perspective is whether you go, big box retail or small, it depends on your supply chain and what their capabilities are and what they could do.
Kelly?
Yeah, I think before you even get to that point, you as a product, you have to know who your consumer is. And once you know who your consumer is and who you're targeting, then you can target if you want to go into big box, if you want to go into independent, if you want to go into hotels. There's a lot of avenues to sell your product as long as you understand and know who your consumer is. Once you know who your consumer is, you've got to be able to speak to your consumer. And if you can't speak to your consumer without actually sitting there talking one-on-one with that consumer, and you can't do that through your product, then you're not ready to go to market. So as long as your packaging can speak to the consumer, you know your consumer, then take it to a big box or take it to a retailer that is going to help you speak to that consumer. And more importantly is, how are you going to continue to speak to that consumer? So are you going to have line extensions going forward? Are you going to have product on sale? Are you going to use digital marketing? How are you going to talk to that consumer without physically being there? But you absolutely have to know your consumer. If you don't know your consumer, they're not even going to listen to you when you sit down with a buyer.
And I want to just kind of tangent off into that. Can each of you just very briefly give me a step or two that it would take for them to take, let's say their product is ready, it's packaged beautifully, they're ready to do it. How are they going to do this? What steps do they do? How do they make this contact? You want to start, Kelly, on that?
Sure. There are a lot of different ways to make the contact. I think the one thing that everybody needs to understand is if you look at this room and you look at everybody who's participating and really wanting to be a part of CBD, there's usually one buyer that's at each retailer. So if you're talking a Kroger, a Safeway, or a Walmart, there's one person that's responsible for making that decision. When you've got 10,000 new items that are coming into a store every year, and after 2 years, about 80% of those items are going to fail, you need to really understand. You've got to get in, meet with the buyer, try to build those relationships. I would suggest not sending a cold call email because most of the time those are going to get deleted. So it's about relationships. It's about participating in the shows that the retailers have. It's about finding brokers. Brokers are a great way and a great source to try to get you into the retailers. They know the retailers. Most of them specialize in what they're doing. So if you've got a natural product, get a natural product broker, depending on what you're trying to do. Use the tools around you because just making a cold call isn't going to get you there. And then it's about relationship building.
That's great, Kelly. Does anybody have anything to add to that part?
To backpack off what Kelly was saying, the way to get there also is if you just want to know where to even start, go to, say, your Walmart page. They have a section, all of them pretty much say supplier diversity or supplier connections. That's where you would go to even know where to start to get your foot in the door. They have checklists on what you need, and that's a good place to go and start your venture if you're trying to get into a big box retail.
Good. Do you have anything, Stephen, Peter?
No, I would just really echo what Kelly said and try very hard to establish a good rapport with the buyers and give them a reason to feel secure about your brand and about the operation that you're running. Those relationships are more important than I think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, my partner Bob and I have an advantage in that we're both from the consumer products industry, so we have fairly decent buyer relationships already. In the category of national retail, they don't take items terribly often. A lot of times the categories are reviewed once a year. So it is a patient person's game to get into national retail. And if you miss the buying window, that's fine. You have to stay in front of the buyer till the next buying window. So persistence is a big part of being successful, I would say.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Is there any questions about this segment? Yeah, can you stand up? Thank you.
In these different retail chains, is there going to be a destination location for CBD products, or are they going to be mixed within the same category of product that particular product is going to fall?
Sure. Let me take that.
Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, the three of the retailers that we're in with now, they made the decision to merchandise the segment we're pitching as a freestanding segment. And they're doing that for a bunch of reasons. One, they can put that segment in high traffic areas. Two, they don't have to cut the products into the permanent shelf set yet. And we actually love it because our brand is built as a system. So it gives us a big floor plan for our whole system. So I love what they're doing initially, but they're also going tentative. There's another way to think about it. They're going as a freestanding distribution, whether that's a end cap that's freestanding or a tower that's freestanding. That's how most of the retailers are approaching it today.
Do you ever pay a premium for that spot?
Some retailers ask you to participate in advertising expenses and others don't. It depends on the retailer.
And when you're starting with a CBD product, do you recommend going into natural foods, drugstore, big box, or do you have to determine where your product will actually fall into those?
I can take that. I mean, I would say it depends on what your product is.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do is get into retailers that will credential you for other retailers. We were really happy to get into CVS because they've been the early adopter of CBD. But we also are pretty far along at Anthropology. And as a retail brand, that credentials us quite a bit for other retailers. So if you have a retailer that can credential you and you can get in, it is so impactful for other retailers. Gives your brand top spin. So be real careful where you start, is what I would say.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to go into packaging now. So there's a lot of aspects to packaging from a marketing perspective, obviously. We have color, we have design, we have fonts, we have messaging. And again, I think we need to reiterate what they said in the first segment, which is to be very careful with what your claims are and making sure that they are compliant so you don't get pulled off and blacklisted. So let's start with packaging. I'm going to start this one with Stephen. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, so two big things that really kind of centered around CBD and cannabis and the work that we've seen. Number one is price. That is everyone's biggest question. It is their biggest point of emphasis when they're talking to us about doing work together is, what is the price going to be? How can I drive the price down? Why am I paying so much for all of these colors? What's all this cool foil? How much is that going to cost, et cetera, et cetera. What I try to tell people is you can have a very elegant package, something that looks very nice and presents very well on the shelves, and have it be very simplistic. You do not have to break the bank on packaging in order to stand out. And you can do that in a few different ways. You can do that by just basically having clean artwork and having clean execution from your packaging vendor. You can do it by combining different coatings and colors. But there's a vast array of ways that you can basically drive your price down. Another thing that I've had to walk a lot of people through is quantity. The name of the game in packaging is quantity. If you want to get your price point down for your piece price, you need to bolster your quantities in however way possible. A lot of people kind of hesitate with that because there are regulation changes and you don't know what's going to happen. What I recommend is basically designing your packaging to be kind of a uniform package and leaving space for labels. So no matter what, the regulations and the certifications that you have to put on your product go on labels that will go on the package, and you don't have to worry about, oh, I've just wasted so much money on all of this packaging that I can no longer use. So that's my first point. Number two is a little bit simpler. We just recommend that you have your artwork and your packaging invoke a reaction from the person in retail. For a lot of companies in this space, their entire marketing and branding and advertising happens in the store. That's the only place that the customer sees your brand presence. So you need to make sure that you invoke a reaction, that they feel something. One of my favorite quotes in brand strategy is, love me or hate me, but feel me. So it doesn't matter if customers love the way your package is presented. If they don't like it, just make them feel something. Make them remember that your package is there, and make them remember your brand.
Thank you. Go ahead, Peter.
I would say that, packaging is really important. What we did is we hired a brand strategy design firm that actually, this is a little bit cheating, I started 20 years ago. One of our designers, actually in-house, hi Emily, your packaging is like a billboard. In a national retail brick and mortar environment, you can't talk to people like you can in the dispensary where a bud tender can tell a story about your product. You're on your own. So that packaging has to have a message hierarchy, and I loved what you said. That's awesome. It has to provoke a response. But I would say if you don't know what you're doing, get someone who does. The packaging is really important.
Good. Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I would say really great points. The other piece is think about where you're going to want to merchandise your product, because if you don't understand where you're going to merchandise it, and again, it goes back to your consumer, and you don't know who your consumer is you're speaking to, you're gonna have a lot of trial and error, and most startup companies don't have the money to back if you want to all of a sudden switch your packaging to something else. So really know who your consumer is and where you want to merchandise it, and understand that when you get shelf space, there's a person in that store that has to stock your package onto that shelf. And if your package doesn't fit the shelf standards, or it's difficult to stand up, or it's just difficult all the way around, you're going to have somebody take your box of product and leave it in the back room because they don't want to deal with trying to get it on the shelf. So a lot of it is speaking to the consumer through, yes, artwork and different things, but you also really have to think about the practical standpoint of packaging and what you're going to do to merchandise it.
Yeah, good addition, Kelly. Go ahead.
And what I would just add is when you're sourcing for, your packaging supplier to implement that contract, the supply contract or service contract, that you just make sure that your evaluation factors in determining that is, the technical portions, that they match up to what you want, and as well as their past performance or what their track record is. So those are some two key points in evaluating for packaging supplier.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there a way for people that put their products in there to have compliance to make sure that that real retailer is shelving their products, or do they need to go to every individual stores where their product is? I mean, there has to be some autonomy on the part, or onus on the part of the retailer. Isn't that correct?
Sure, yeah, there absolutely is onus. So you're talking, just so I understand your question, are you talking about when it's displayed on the shelf? What
Correct.
responsibility does the retailer have
Yes, to make sure that's on there, not in the back room.
No, yeah, I mean, there's a huge strategy. There are teams that are built of this. There are hundreds of people, let's say, for a Safeway or a Kroger, and all they work on is the planogram. And so it's what type of shelf do they want, and it kind of goes back to, I don't know who asked the question, I think it was in the back. Is it going to be integrated? Is it not going to be integrated? So the retailer has their own strategy for how they want their stores laid out, and then they'll take your product and fit it into their strategy. So absolutely, in every retailer that I've worked with, and probably you have, they all have their own strategy and their own success to winning.
Okay, great. What questions do we have about packaging? Anybody?
What is a typical purchasing order when sampling product for the first time in a retailer?
I think that
Stephen?
Are you just talking? Sorry, are you just talking about quantity, like what we usually see, or?
Yeah, so if you do get a buyer to take on your product and they're going to sample it in, let's say, 50 of their stores, what is a typical purchasing order? And then I have another question to piggyback. How quickly does that product need to move off the shelf for them to be incentivized to buy again?
Oh, so that's actually
Yeah,
probably,
that would
that's
be
not.
Peter
That's,
or- All right.
that's you guys.
I know you're going to hate me. It depends on the retailer. Very rarely will they say, "We'll put you in a store." That's only like a Whole Foods would do that, or a more of a decentralized buying system. Most of the national retailers, they make their decision and you're in. With CBD, some of them are scaling into green states first, so you see a phased rollout. The orders can go to as few as 30 stores, as many as 1,300. And you don't really know until you get in front of the buyer, and they're not going to tell you anything until they make their decision. The date at which they tell you, they give you time. They know they're dealing with a relatively unsophisticated emerging industry. So the retailers that we've been working with, I would say, have been very forgiving. And but they're not going to give you 6 months. It might be 3 months before you have to ship. Yeah.
Great. Kelly, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think it absolutely depends on the retailer. But on average, and it kind of goes back into packaging and case size. So you want to be sensitive to how many items you actually have in a case. So if you're a startup company, you may want to start with a pack of 6s so that when you get these orders, you can fulfill the orders. But on average, I'll speak from a Kroger perspective because I worked for Kroger for so many years. They'll order a case of each product for every store that product is going to go into, and then on average they'll watch that product, and if it doesn't sell at least a case a week in the 6 months trial that they give you, you're out of there, because that shelf space is premium. So really it goes back to packaging, and pay attention to, one, how many units you're going to have in each case, and then the other piece depends on, know your retailer. Kroger has how many thousands of stores? Are you really ready for that business? Do you want to start with a smaller retailer where you may be a natural grocer and you're going into a smaller set of stores, so you're not going to get that large order? And as you said earlier, sometimes being in the big boxes may not be the best thing for a startup company, because it could make or break everything that you do. So that's a great question, and there's a lot of thought. There's a lot of thought that has to go into it.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. So let's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want to piggyback that question on margins. How many times have you, Peter, or Kelly walked away from deals and dealing with the buyer and said, you guys are really beating me up too much, or I'm just not?
Good question. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we're steering clear of certain retailers that have a reputation for being tough on vendors. The only time you want to go into one of those retailers is when you have a lot of leverage. But in terms of margin, they're wanting anywhere from 40 to 50%. I mean, it's a big cut of your economics.
No, because we come from online, being successful in nutrition, and now we roll into this, and even in nutrition, I walk away from some deals that said the margins aren't there. It's just-
Yeah, the margins can be lower. This gets into sort of how much are you subsidizing things like getting your product on the shelf, how you're helping to market the products. Once they take you in, they really don't want you to fail, especially in CBD, because CBD is a category where there's a lot of eyeballs on it. I mentioned earlier the buyers are, bless you, under a lot of pressure. They don't want to put brands on the shelf that aren't going to do well. It doesn't look good for them. So when you get into margin, we had one retailer say, tell me what you want the margin to be. And we did. And that was great for us because they don't want to have us not do well.
Great. Good question.
The
Thank
only
you.
caveat that I would say is the margin also depends on the category that you're playing in. Because if you're in the beverage industry, your margin is going to be a lot less, and they're going to make a lot less. If you're in the snack industry, they're going to be looking for the 40. So it really depends on the category that you're in. But typically, if it's traditional grocery, you're talking 40 to 50% margins.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's go into our last little topic now, which is how customers can stay. How our consumers that are coming in and giving the demand to you, and they're changing. You understand that the laws are changing, the regulatory atmosphere is changing, and we want to be prepared that we're not putting all of our marketing dollars into one area. So how can you help them to stay completely, I guess not completely, but fairly flexible in their marketing approach and protect their bottom line at the same time? Sandra, do you want to start that one?
Well, from my perspective, getting into big box retail, just market consistently, send your capability statement to these specialized groups. Their information's online. Then you also have, there's other avenues of getting your products out there. Like, government is soon going to be starting, there are already a lot of agencies researching different products, different, elements of this. You just need to be able to go, on fbo.gov and search for those opportunities. So there's just other avenues other than retail that you could actually make big waves in or get your foot in the door per se, and then work your way up there.
Great. That's good. Go ahead, Peter.
I was always taught that a brand is a promise. When I was a brand manager for Clorox, they talked a lot about what's the promise you're making, and the promise is first delivered through the product. And I go back to that point I made before. Unless your products delight people, don't put them in national distribution because they won't last. And if you're not making products that delight people, then that's a question to ask yourself. We intentionally built our execution around an idea that was bigger than CBD, because CBD is a volatile industry. There are other compounds of the plant that might be bigger in 2 or 3 years. So I would say the category is a little immature in how it's making so much about CBD. Brands are bigger than an ingredient, and you have to have a strategy that reflects that.
Flexibility in the play, a future play. Good. Okay, go ahead.
And just in terms of being flexible with your packaging and being able to be nimble, it's really about minimizing risk and minimizing potential loss. We talked about a little bit earlier regulation changes. We have some people, like I said, some customers will have us print a uniform package and they'll kind of explain what's in the product and the certifications on labels. We also have people who will use primary packaging, whether it be glass or plastic, and that will be their uniform package. That's what the product will go directly in. And then all of their branding will come from a printed sleeve, which is far less expensive than an actual box. It's much less expensive to produce, much less expensive to ship. And so being able to be flexible in those two different ways, I think, is important, especially in this industry where things are constantly evolving.
Great, thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I think with that question, along with everything else, it's best to take it back to the basics. You as a consumer, how do you like to be talked to? When you're looking for new products, where do you go to find those new products, and where and why do you keep going back to get those products? So it goes back to the keep it simple, and realize that there are a lot of avenues right now that you can get your items out there. If it's a product that's going into a store, most people love to sample the product, and that is the way that you're going to get the majority of the people coming to you and wanting it more. So when it comes to having marketing and funding and you throw your life savings into everything else. Remember, you've got to steal the life savings from somebody else that you know, because you're going to have to pay for the sampling, and you're going to have to stay connected to the consumer, and just always think back to how would your neighbor find out about your product, and how do you find out about new products. And if you can answer that question for yourself, you'll be able to answer that question for the consumers.
All right, thank you. So before we do the last little session of questions, I just want to reintroduce our panelists so you can speak with them afterwards as well. Okay, so we'll start with Kelly. Kelly Bruce, President of Sales of Boring Life. Peter Murain, raise your hand, co-founder and CEO of Mox Mind and Body. Sandra Thibodeau, founder and CEO of Cannabis Business Opportunities. And Stephen Bearmore, he's the Director of New Business Development for Corners Packaging. And I'm Holly Ford. I'm with Cannabis 10X here and Zarian Firm International Business Brokerage. So founded that company. Let's get some final questions here. We'll walk out here. Okay. Oh, she's got you. Go.
Hi, I'm curious about smokable flower into different stores, and if you've seen any big box stores being open to it or carrying it, or what kind of restrictions if you come across any.
Good question.
I'll try and take that. So we're not doing, we're just doing topical right now. I would say for big box, it's still too early. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that addressing the smokable is really going to come down after the FDA puts out their policies, and then also just depending on the state compliance, if they even allow smokable or not in that state. So that's, I personally don't see it anytime soon in retail publicly like that yet, when we have topicals and, like nuts we have to work on and getting in there. So I don't think that.
Yeah, I think that from a big box perspective, they are way, way far off from having that. Eventually, depending on how the market goes, they may set it up the way they used to set up the cigarettes or the natural sections, where you could buy it in bulk, or there's ability to do it. But you also have to think about the fact that you don't just want to have that available for all consumers to just come in and get. So they're going to have people power to man that if they're going to start selling that. And most of the big box retailers are not in a position where they want to spend their labor money to do something like that. So you're better off trying to go to smaller stores and independents if you're going to go that route.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
So maybe not big box in the traditional sense. Can you share your perspective on the outlook for CBD products on Amazon?
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, we're wondering why Amazon hasn't said, yeah, let's do it. There's a big business on hemp oil products on Amazon, and we felt like, how do I say this? It's kind of like going around the rules, and at some point, the way that the hemp oil products are talking about themselves, there'll be a reckoning, because there's a lot of like snake oily claims, in my opinion. I can't imagine that when national retailers go forward that Amazon's going to hold, but I don't think it's going to be for a while. They're risk averse. The retailers are risk averse. It's so interesting. They do not like failure, risk, compliance. They're very regulated. We had a buyer that we've been dying to get into, and we're so close, and the buyer loves us, but her compliance people are not letting CBD go forward. That's the state of national retail, I would think. In 90% of national retail, Amazon is a subset of that. I think once the Farm Bill, as the Farm Bill trickles out into states passing regulations, it may shift. But a lot of states have not issued rulings, and that's one of the stipulations in the Farm Bill. So until all the states have their own laws about CBD, I think Amazon's going to hold.
I agree. They're going to hold, and the difference between hemp versus CBD on the label is a big sticking point with Amazon. But what you need to understand is Amazon and the big box, they have a responsibility to the consumers. So I know we're all eager to get out there, and we're all very, very eager to sell our products. Me being the first to want to get out there, but these big box are holding off because they have a responsibility to the consumers. When you go in their stores, you're buying product that they believe is safe for you, that they believe you should be purchasing. And so they've got to hold off until they feel comfortable enough. And a lot of it goes back to responsibility, and really, are the retailers doing the right thing? And Amazon does a lot of stuff, and they do it really well. But part of what they do is they protect the consumer, and so you have to keep that in mind, that these retailers, it's their responsibility to protect the consumers.
I'll give you an example. This is not Amazon, but one of our buyers is a pharmacy, national pharmacy chain, and one differentiator for the Mox brand is it's pharmacist formulated. Our pharmacist is actually right there. Hi, Ben. And Ben's been formulating CBD for about 30 years. He knows what he's doing. And the fact that we're pharmacist formulated, they didn't want us to claim on our packaging, even though it's factually true, because they don't want any association that we are endorsed product by the drugstore pharmacy. So that's the level of risk aversion right now, asking us to take a piece of our story out of the mix, even though it's true. So Amazon, I think, is out there.
Okay, question?
Yep. Hi, Kelly. Go, A Boring Life. I had an interesting experience a couple weeks ago. I was on vacation, channel surfing. I got HSN or QVC, I can't remember. And these two ladies were selling CBD lotion, $30. They had not a clue what CBD was. They just knew they couldn't say it cured cancer. They had two models, just layering this stuff on. They sold 10,000 units in 45 minutes. They would have sold 20,000 units if they had enough inventory. I was just wondering what your thoughts are regarding, it was just sucked up. You could see it being sucked up by the U.S. market on HSN or QVC. What's your view on selling CBD products through that channel?
Go.
So,
I can tell you that we've had meetings with QVC. Our founder, Serafina, co-founded another company, so they have relationships with QVC. QVC is kind of where every other retailer, you have to think about it as a retailer, is from a legal perspective. So they're very excited. They love the products. They're ready to go. They've got buyers. They're ahead of the curve, and they're ready. But they've got to get it passed through legal, and legal is not going to make any decisions until the FDA has a ruling. So QVC and some of those avenues are just like the rest. You just got to hold off, but try to get your products in front of them. So when the ruling happens, they're ready to take it and ready to sell. At least that's what we
position with your
encounter.
marketing strategy and be ready. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to add to that?
We ruled out the shopping channels for now. For a couple reasons, but they're a great place to go for telling a story. So I think that they're definitely a channel to consider. Sometimes their terms on how they buy and what they expect on returns can put you out of business. So if you do a shopping channel deal, you need to read the fine print. There's a lot of nightmare stories about brands that didn't ship exactly what they said they would ship or how they would ship it, and the shopping channels can be very punitive, I would say, versus partnerish. Depends on who you're dealing with, but yeah, that's one of the reasons we're avoiding them for now.